Today on Conversations Aloud, we're discussing the Iran war, why it's the most unpopular war in the US, and how is it different to other US wars and its impact on US politics. To help us unpack these issues, we're joined by Blake Stilwell, editor-in-chief of We Are the Mighty, a media company covering the US military, veterans, and national security. Blake is also a former US Air Force combat cameraman, giving him a unique perspective on both military operations and how wars are communicated to the public. Welcome to the show, Blake.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you.
Great to have you. So, Blake, the U.S. has been involved in military operations for decades. Yet it feels like
Jesus.
this conflict with Iran, it seems to have generated a different public reaction. It's very unpopular. What do you feel makes this conflict different to other previous U.S. wars?
Well, I'm a veteran of the Iraq War, and I joined the day after 9/11. So, back then, the feeling was very, America was attacked. It was our Pearl Harbor moment in a way. Um, so the war in Afghanistan had huge popularity coming right on the heels of the September 11th attacks. And the popularity of the Afghan war lasted for so long that it was able to carry over into Iraq. I mean, no matter how the Iraq war ended or how popular it was when it ended, when it first started, around 75% of Americans supported the Iraq war because they believed that the Bush administration's reasoning that Saddam Hussein was somehow linked to Al Qaeda. Now, in retrospect, we know that wasn't true. And, anyone with a history, working knowledge of the Middle East history of the 20th century would have guessed that it wasn't true. But Iran is something totally different. Wars do not traditionally get more popular as time goes on. And that's true with almost every war since polling began. The Vietnam War, believe it or not, that also started off very popular. People really believed that if we let Vietnam fall to the communists, then other countries would follow because communism was considered a real threat to the American way of life back then. But as time went on, casualties mounted, images of the Vietnam War were broadcast into people's living rooms every night. The support started to wane. And then you find, the government wasn't really honest about the war from casualty counts to the reasoning that we went into Vietnam. And it created a real lack of trust that never really went away. So by the end of the Vietnam War, beginning in 1968, support just fell. And, in Iran never had that honeymoon moment. There was no September 11th. There was no Pearl Harbor. There was no, war on communism. There wasn't even a war on terrorism. It's just Islamic regime in Iran bad. Let's make sure that they don't have a nuclear weapon. But even that reasoning is flawed because just months prior, we supposedly knocked out their nuclear weapons capability. Completely obliterated was the term from the administration. So the reason you went into the war is to take out a nuclear program that was already supposed to be completely obliterated. What are the American people supposed to believe that, U.S. troops are being wounded and killed for?
Yeah, it's, even the objectives seem to be changing day after day. It was nuclear. At a moment, it was regime change, and then it was reducing their missile capability. Now it seems like opening Strait of Hormuz is the objective, which wasn't a problem before.
It's a real problem for the administration because if you keep changing your reasoning, you're killing your own credibility. You could say a lot about the Bush administration's reason for going into Iraq, but until Bush left office, his reasoning never changed. He was on the WMD message until the very last day he was in office. And, that's enough for some Americans. Clearly not everybody, but I mean, as you said, the reasoning for the Iran war changes all the time. The objectives change. Our success rates change. The length of time the war is supposed to go on change. Even the cost of the war has changed twice in a day, just based on who's testifying in front of Congress at any given moment. What, as a real American now, we have access to all the world's information, opinions coming from everywhere, which back in 2001, 2003 wasn't the case. It's hard to believe, but we didn't even have YouTube at the beginning of the Iraq War, let alone all these other social media. It makes it really, really difficult for an American to sit here and follow the administration's reasoning. And you can tell that support is slipping because even the MAGA base who loves Trump, and I believe actually would vote for him, even if he did shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue, as he famously said, is starting to lose patience with the administration's reasoning.
Yeah, it's kind of a combination, I guess, as you said, where now we don't just have the traditional media that can create a narrative and stick with that narrative. It could be challenged very
Yes.
easily by the alternative media, by independent journalists that can question.
Or outright lies.
Yeah,
Like disinformation is a thing. And I'm not calling anyone disinformation. I'm just saying, it's out there and we all know
yeah.
it.
It just feels like, disinformation has always been part of the war, right? What is the saying? The first casualty of war is truth. Is that the?
It depends on who you are. The first casualty of war to me as a former US troop is the plan.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. Yeah.
But yeah, true. That I would agree with that saying, it goes out the window really quick, or the truth becomes really subjective to which side of the war you're on.
This narrative that we're fighting something whereby the people over there also want us to fight and bomb the country. Americans have that experience of being attacked, and Iran kind of had their Pearl Harbor moment by that attack, that initial attack. And so you have a very strong kind of reaction that I think some Americans are still not fully comprehending of the challenge that the U.S. has with actually attacking another country that is defending itself.
Right. I agree. There's a problem with being the aggressor. And it seems to me that the administration thought this was going to be an easy win because, the Iraq war, at least the US led invasion of Iraq was relatively easy. They had an experience in Venezuela that was just overwhelming. And I think that they honestly believed that this regime would fall. They gave opposition parties the chance. You're the aggressor now, and you have to win this one. And time is just not on your side for the popular reasons back home that we talked about. But, what is apparent to me is that there is a complete lack of understanding about Iran, the regime, its military, and how everything was set up. They have been preparing for this war for a very long time. And that gives you that amount of time gives you the ability to explore every option, including, exactly what the US is known to do, which is to bomb military targets and sometimes critical infrastructure, and to be able to work around it. We're also in the world, we're on this cusp of a dramatic change in how wars are fought. You see it in Ukraine against the Russians. It's not a war of airstrikes and infantry movements anymore. It's a war of drone, and it's a war of missiles. They're doing some version of the Strait of Hormuz right now, and that's really not what the US military was ramping up to do. In the past couple of years, we were preparing for a pivot to Asia to counter Chinese dominance. We were preparing for countering Russian hypersonics. This is not what we had planned on. And so we're really kind of rushing to catch up to the idea that the most effective weapon is basically a lawnmower attached to a bomb that's built dirt cheap and made in mass. And it's great for, if you're paying for the war. But if you're behind and while you're fighting one, it's problematic. So, this lack of understanding of the enemy that we're actually going up against, I think is a real problem. And I think it continues to be a real problem in negotiations. Like you said earlier, everybody is now focused on who controls the Strait of Hormuz. Is it open? Is it closed? How do we get it open? How do we make a long-term plan? The Strait of Hormuz wasn't even in the rationale for going into war in the first place. It's just something that happened. But you would think that the Pentagon and the White House would have a plan in place for, keeping that strait open. But that doesn't appear to be the case. I'm no insider, but if they had a plan, I would have hoped that they would have implemented it by now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult. There seems to have been a lot of misjudgments, and I mean the way I don't know how you see it, but the way I see it is that there is no military solution to opening the Strait of Hormuz. There has to be a diplomatic solution to create drones very cheaply, to create those missiles very cheaply. They could do it en masse, and it all takes a few drones to kind of close the strait. And so unless you have an ability to destroy all the drones and all the missiles, how is that possible before even the midterm elections, let alone in a year's time? It just seems like the diplomatic solution is the only route.
Yeah, the U.S. could force control of the Strait of Hormuz, but I mean, there's no really great, easy way to do it. I mean, they would either have to start bombing civilian targets or, start flying further than just the south of Iran. They're going to have to start bombing other places. I mean, there's still thousands of launchers inland, even if they clear the coastal batteries. They could take Karg Island, but all you're going to do, I mean, that's 6,000 kilometers from the strait. So all you're going to do is make another target for Iranian missiles and drones. You could do a ground war. You could do an absolute invasion of Iran, but that would be really bad for you in the midterms. Most of the American public, and I would venture to guess even Republicans in Congress, would not support a ground war in Iran.
Especially in July, August, where the temperatures are extremely high.
Yeah, and and in the meantime, we're losing missile stocks and we're losing our influence on Iraq. This is Iran's backyard we're playing in, and although the U.S. has had a presence on the Arabian Peninsula for 100 plus years, this is still Iran's backyard, and we need to start playing like it. I mean, I'm no fan of the regime, but they are the regional hegemon, and you have to respect the fact that they've been planning this war for so long. Stop being surprised that Iran can put up a fight.
Yeah, it's just at the same time, the problem is that the U.S., it kind of feels like for Iran, they have to control the Strait of Hormuz because it's leverage over the U.S. to ensure that the U.S. can meet their conditions. For the U.S., losing control of the Strait of Hormuz means that they're unable, their military power is not matching to people's expectations. And also, in essence, Iran can now choose to ensure that any ship that passes has to transact not in dollar, but in another currency, which kind of attacks the whole dollar reserve currency. And if that kind of is damaged, essentially the U.S. is going to go bankrupt because people will not have dollars as much as before, and they won't invest back into the U.S. economy. So it's kind of a very difficult situation for the U.S. to either accept kind of giving control and the potential of the attack on dollar reserve currency, but then there's no military solution. So it is very challenging. I see it.
Yeah, and time is not on Trump's side on this. I mean, he's running out of missiles. He's, the more troops he loses, the more unpopular the war gets, especially when Americans still can't tell you why they're fighting it. And in the meantime, Iran's, the regime is cash strapped. Everybody knows they've been suffering under sanctions for decades, but there's also an advantage to that. If you've always been broke, you're comfortable with being broke. And I don't think that it's in Iran's best interest to control the strait forever, but it is in their interest to control it for long enough that they can exact some kind of price from the United States, be that sanctions relief, unfreezed assets, the ability to sell oil, or just, more freedom of movement for, the leadership. And the longer that, there are ceasefires in place, the longer they are, Trump stalls, or the longer he holds out for the deal that he wants, the more they're able to rebuild their stockpiles, continue attacks, and, raise the price of disengagement. And this thing isn't going away. It's going to consume his entire administration. He can't ignore it. He can't get out of it. And so far, he hasn't been able to negotiate his way out of it either. It's troubling, right? Especially for an administration with an agenda as big as his. What do you do?
Yeah.
The simple truth is that President Trump is not a great crisis president. And we saw that in his first administration with the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, in the end, he did help get a vaccine, but along the way, I mean, every day was something new.
Yeah, and going back to the unfreezing of assets, I think the problem he has over there is because he's made fun of Obama so much for giving $2 billion to Iran, but now we're talking about 24 billion, and so I think it's very difficult for him to take that step because he's made fun of it like recently, like a month ago. So
I don't think there's support in Congress. I think his Republican allies might revolt over that. A lot of them, Trump has kind of top cover to be able to do whatever he wants and still get votes and still garner support. But the people downstream don't have that same top cover. So, if you're, Tom Cotton in Arkansas, I don't think you're going to support the Iranian regime getting $26 billion.
Yeah. And I guess the other point is that President Trump campaigned on avoiding what he called the forever wars,
Mhm.
and he criticized, the previous
Mhm.
administrations. How do you think this conflict affects future voters when they listen to candidates about their promises, which seem, even this one, which was so obvious that, he explicitly said no more forever wars, and here we are again.
Well, I mean, that depends on the voters. I think that the Middle Eastern diaspora learned very quickly that Trump's rhetoric isn't always going to match his words or his actions, rather. They went for him over Kamala Harris in the 2024 election because of what was happening in Gaza, but they forgot to remember that Trump had moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so I think that segment of voters uh, could feel burned by, basically never doing anything about Gaza and, starting another forever war in the Middle East. It has spread. A lot of these families are from, but Lebanon is on fire. Syria is getting bombed and will cost $200 billion to rebuild. Iran is gaining hegemony over Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. They're all seeing fallout from the war. And so I don't think that segment of voters is likely to go back to being Republican. But for the MAGA base, which I think is probably the most critical to the Republican Party and especially President Trump, a lot of them do feel betrayed. And you can see it in the influencers who have been his most vocal supporters. Many are now becoming his most vocal critics. Nick Fuentes, I think, is probably the most popular example, very far right. But now he's telling people in his sphere to vote Democrat, like outright saying vote Democrat because of the war. I think a lot of them feel uniquely betrayed by the Iran war, and you can tell by will they actually come out and vote Democrat? I have no idea, but it sure probably can't feel good if you're a Republican strategist hearing all your former base influencers not just saying don't support the war, but like completely vote the other way. I mean, that's got to raise some alarm.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel that, from what I understand, and I'm not in the U.S., I'm in the U.K., but it seems like the Israel topic is coming front in the elections,
Mhm.
whereby do you support Israel or do you not? It's almost becoming like we're kind of separating candidates between, do they support Israel, do they not support Israel? Is that the reality of things, or is it just I'm based in the UK and I'm not?
No, there is a section of Americans on both right and left who are hypercritical of how Israeli politics have infected American politics. I mean, and in some ways you understand it. There are members of Congress wearing IDF uniforms in the halls of Congress. Americans like to see themselves as, the melting pot, right? But for someone to come in and take over, for laws to be proposed that merge another country's military with ours, when Americans can't get health care, but we're spending money that could be spent on health care to Israel and watching them use it to, one, get free healthcare, but also two, commit a genocide in Gaza. Things are extraordinarily difficult for a lot of people here. And it's not just at the gas pump because of the Iran war. I mean, we're talking about rampant food insecurity, even among members of the military and their families, by the way. People can't get healthcare. They've ended subsidies to the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, that allowed many people to actually get affordable health care. They're ending SNAP participation, food stamps. And, food banks are being overrun and drained out by average Americans who, may work one or two jobs. And so there's part of, and this is not right or left, it's mostly left, but there is a huge segment of Americans wondering, why do we keep paying for this when I can't afford to live in America today? I can't afford to pay my rent. I mean, forget about getting a mortgage. So many people will have already accepted the fact that they will never be able to afford a home. But like feeding your children, I think I read a statistic that said like 1 in 8 families skip meals so that they can afford to live and, get healthcare or afford other things. America isn't like, not everyone here is destitute, but when you have to choose between food and a doctor's visit when you're sick, I mean, there's a real problem here. And Americans are starting to, be wise to that, especially younger Americans. Amongst the boomer generation and some of the older people, communism is a dirty word. Socialism is a dirty word associated with communism. But increasingly, people who have no memory of the Cold War are coming of age, and they're going to start wondering why, if we can spend this much money here, can we not spend a fraction of that money so that I can get free healthcare or dental? Or why isn't dental insurance included with my health insurance? And why does it all cost so much? Things are hard for a lot of families right now, and they're not going to understand, why Israel has free healthcare and we don't, especially when we're subsidizing.
That is insane. You mentioned the merging of the militaries. Do you know much about that? Because I heard about the
No, I don't think it's something that's ever going to pass. The real problem with American politics, in my opinion, lately has been that it's run on stunts. And we like to do stunts because they get a politician or something in the news for a little bit and plays to a base that they know they're trying to keep in their camp. And I think this was a stunt. Can't imagine an American actually really believing that we should merge with another country's military, especially one so controversial as the IDF.
yeah.
I believe that the congressman wearing an IDF uniform in the halls of Congress, I believe that was a stunt. But like these stunts are also incredibly deleterious to constituencies. You can look at Greg Abbott in Texas. He pulled a stunt where he was going to inspect every truck that came across the border with Mexico, and it stalled traffic. And suddenly, traffic was backed up forever, and it cost him $2 billion a day. That's a really pricey stunt for something that didn't need to be done in the first place.
Mhm.
And you can read the news and find numerous examples of these stunts, but it's a real issue. No one's seems to be attacking the things that are actually problematic in this country. And instead, we're pulling stunts.
Yeah. When you speak to veterans, about this relationship with the IDF, and you said some congressmen wear the IDF uniform. I mean, what do they justify it, or are they confused?
I think most of them would be confused. Each branch of the U.S. military has its own very unique culture. The Marine Corps, especially, product of its own culture. And the idea that we love our allies as U.S. troops, but the idea that somehow we would be supporting a country who doesn't support us is anathema. When you join the military in the United States, I mean, it's a patriotic moment. You do get filled with pro-American propaganda, for lack of a better term, but it's not in a bad way. I mean, you're putting your life on the line for your country. And I'm sure it's this way in every other military. And so they want your esprit de corps to be high. That does not include, running off and giving your life for a country that isn't yours. And I think a lot of U.S. troops would have trouble understanding that. This is not World War II. We are not fighting the good fight to liberate Europe from the Nazi jackboot. We don't know actually what this war is for, but it sure seems like Israel started it and dragged us into it. I think the most important thing to know about individual U.S. troops is that they will always, always perform to the best of their ability, even when the mission makes no sense. They don't really know why they're fighting the war. In Iraq, for example, a lot of us, by the time I got back in 2006, there was a lot of grumbling. Like, what are we doing? What are we still doing here? We got Saddam. There's no WMDs. What are we still doing here? And these are amongst low-level U.S. troops now. But even though we grumbled, we still went out every mission and did the best job that we possibly could. And I saw that across every branch. So I firmly believe that even if U.S. troops over there don't really get while they're there, they're still going to perform their jobs. There's no there's no way there's going to be a mutiny or um, you know, they're going to just refuse to do what's ordered of them. But you know, I can tell you that if you floated the idea of merging with the IDF, there would be a lot of confused people.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Did you hear about the reports where some soldiers were complaining that leadership at the start of this war sent messages about this is to bring about Armageddon and the return of
Um,
Jesus?
I did hear about those. I did. The U.S. military is kind of in many ways reflective of American society as a whole, and the majority of them are some flavor of Christian. And just like in America as a whole, there are going to be people who hold those kind of extreme beliefs. It may be true that people in the military believe that, and I know that that company commander really did send that message. But again, as U.S. troops have freedom of religion, just like they have freedom of everything else. The only thing that is restricted is freedom of speech while you're in uniform. Because your company commander says this is a holy war, we're all going to bring about Jesus. If if I had gotten that text message as his troop, I'd be like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Like, he's not going to do anything that's going to, he's not going to launch nukes on his own. He's not going to have a Crimson Tide situation, but like, you would still go to work and do your job. You'd just be really, really wary about hanging out with that guy after hours. Like, that guy's bonkers. It's an interesting example of, how diverse the U.S. military can really be at times. This person clearly lived in his own social bubble and thought that this was something okay to reveal to his subordinates.
Yeah.
By and large, the U.S. military are some of the most educated and experienced people in America. Like, I think it's trustworthy to say that they know better.
Yeah. You said you were in Iraq. Where did you go in Iraq?
I was in Baghdad
Right.
in 2006.
And we're going off topic here, but I guess was there a different perspective that you gained from going there compared to what you had before going?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you know, experience is everything. I could read books about um, you know, Iraq. I could read books about the regime, but like going there and seeing it, and talking to Iraqis and troops on the ground, this it's an entirely different thing. I have a master's degree in international relations with a focus on the Middle East, and I love studying it. But I also, as I studied it, I remembered my trips to Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Iraq and elsewhere. And later on, I moved to the West Bank. I lived in Nablus for
All
two
right.
years. There's no book that can really prepare you for being there and seeing things. Like I said, it's the God-given right of every troop and every army everywhere in the history of the world to grumble and piss and moan and complain, and they do. But it's interesting to hear what they complain about or what they talk about or what's important to them. But at the end of the day, everyone goes out and does their duty. But yeah, uh, when I got there, everyone was wondering, why are we still here? What's happening? It doesn't seem like things are getting
Yeah.
better. If you look at the history of that time period, things were certainly not getting better.
Yeah. And that was still kind of fresh from, the war on terror. So, people
Yes.
had questions there,
Yes.
but I'm assuming now people have more questions because there's no connection to anything that's happening.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, and and there was a time where relations between Iran and the U.S. were looking up. I mean, we were on the same side in the fight against ISIS, right? And it was with Iranian support that we were able to restore order in Iraq by the end of the U.S. withdrawal there. We wouldn't have been able to unless Iran was okay with helping calm that populace. I mean, they are proxy to Iran. It would have been much more natural to have the JCPOA in effect and let that go and you know have Iran be an actor and do what is expected of them rather than continue to make them a pariah and you know hold a gun to their head and then miss.
And the thing is, they met all the conditions, from my understanding, of the JCPOA, and I think that's
From my
the
understanding too.
issue for them. Of course, there's many issues, but the element of trust is kind of completely broken, because they entered into an agreement with the U.S., the JCPOA. Trump ripped it apart. They were negotiating not once but twice, and during those negotiations, they got attacked and their leadership got killed. And so it's very, I mean, I'm just thinking from their perspective, it's very difficult to engage in a conversation and an agreement with the US. And that's why I think this MOU is more like, US do something, and if you do it, we'll also match it. It's kind of taking step by step, it seems like, as opposed to previous agreements.
Well, I mean, first of all, the JCPO, this is another stunt example. Trump wanted to seem, hard on Iran. So he tore up the JCPOA, and look where it got him. He didn't need to do that. That was a done deal. He could have just let it go, but he wanted to roll back some of Obama's wins. It was a stunt, and it blew up in his face. Now, with the memorandum of understanding, the thing about the JCPOA is everything was very definite. Every detail was negotiated and in place, and they were following it, and there were rewards, and there were, punishments. And the memorandum of understanding is not that. It's the opposite. It's a memorandum of misunderstanding, because everything is so vague. You can interpret it however you want. And then when someone goes to break it, they can say, well, I'm following the memorandum. This is what happened just a few days ago with the bombing in the Strait, is that make arrangements for that. It could have been like just setting up a toll booth. Like, hey, the arrangement is, you pay at the toll booth and then you get through safely. So what does make arrangements mean? That's the problem. It's Trump wants a deal. So they get this memorandum, and so they rush through it. The problem is that real governance and real treaties and real negotiation takes time. But the time it takes to do these things isn't great for a news cycle if that's all you care about. I think a problem with American politics is that we don't plan for 30 years in the future anymore. We plan for next week, or how the public's going to respond to X versus Y. And that's not what every other country in the world does. And look at it. It's killing us.
Yeah, it's I guess it's the drawback of democracy, where like China doesn't have this issue, because they there's no elections, so they can plan, for 20, 30 years. And to your point about the memorandum of understanding. So yeah, the fifth point, it was to make arrangements for, I think, something around the, facilitating safe passage through the Strait. But the Iranians saw it as they control the Strait, and they will make the arrangements, and no one else will make those arrangements, where the U.S. created a southern corridor that wasn't there before to move move ships away from Iran's control, and Iran saw that as the U.S. trying to remove their leverage from that, and so the things that happened followed. But going to your point about we don't have time, because you're right. There's the news cycle, but then there's the midterm elections, which is November, and then there's the oil strategic reserves that is keeping oil prices low, which is expected to be there's no more buffer, either end of August or end of September. So what do you think?
They're 42% right now.
Yeah, the lowest it's been since it was created in 1983. What do you think will happen to the U.S. midterms elections if Trump can't end the war by then?
Well, the traditional thinking is that it's always the economy. It's the economy, stupid, right? It's not looking good for Trump and the Republicans. They control all three houses of government, and some would even argue the Supreme Court. So if you're in control and prices are out of control, I mean, it seems like
you can still blame Biden, I think.
Well, I mean, they probably will. That's everyone's go-to. I mean, they make some really interesting stretches to go blame Joe Biden for a lot of their ills. I think most of the American public is savvy to the fact that this is Trump's economy now, and that the war in Iran is a war of his choosing. The price of oil, the price of gas. I mean, the numbers say that inflation is holding steady or is slowly increasing. But when you're actually out buying groceries for your family, it sure doesn't feel like that. Like, and I think most Americans would tell you that what their budgets used to buy is a fraction of what it is now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Just
you're going to be looking at all these
Yeah,
things.
just to add on that, because the inflation numbers is not actually a good representation of price changes, because the way it works is that in that bucket to calculate how much prices have increased, they include all sorts of things like electronics and
And
stuff like
stuff.
that.
Yeah.
And so, for people that can't afford VR headsets, which typically go down in price with time because technology improves in time, they're not seeing the effect of that decrease in inflation. They're seeing the
And
biggest increase, which goes to food and energy. And so for the that section of society that can afford those things, their prices are going up, and they cannot connect that to the inflation numbers, which is not a good representation.
yeah, you're right. It is not a good representation, but that's the number that the Trump administration, I guarantee you, will
Yeah.
tout, and most Republicans too, because there's no other way to show it. And it would be a great risk for a Republican to be like, yes, I know things are getting harder. I acknowledge that we have not made this better. You know, to take blame for it and then ask for another chance is a risky campaign move. So they'll use those inflation numbers. But the real problem is it hurts everybody downstream from the White House, because in local elections, you see that, as local communities become more and more cash strapped because the federal government isn't supporting states and states aren't supporting municipalities anymore, local auditors are going to start reviewing property taxes. So property taxes are going to go up. And that makes the cost of living even more unaffordable than it already was. So, owners are going to factor that into rents. Homeowners are going to end up paying more for their own housing than they have been the past couple of years. There is just so much impact from, what the government does, that I don't even think that the people in charge in Washington really realize just how bad it could get. But for people at home, I mean, you don't realize how much the government does for you until it's gone. And people 100% know that certain things are missing. And it's not just because they feel it, they do, but they actually now have somebody on social media telling them why they're feeling this pain. Um, so it's going to be hard to dodge accountability, especially if things get really bad. And that's a real problem for the Republican Party, because the Democrats have nothing to lose. I mean, look at the Mamdani election was a bellwether, not just because it's where conservatives chose to, stake their chances, right, or to place their bets, but it's because the success of what he does there is so big. New York City is a big city, so if he can successfully make public transportation free or give free school lunches there and balance the budget in a few short months, people are going to be wondering, if he can do that in New York City, why the hell can't we have that where I live? Or why can't we have that in Ohio?
Yeah.
And the more successful he is, the more people are going to question, why can't we have what they're doing in New York in America? And that's a real problem, because we already have Democratic Socialists running for House seats. It's a real problem for the Republicans,
Yeah.
especially free healthcare, free school, food subsidies. That's where Americans hurt. And that's what they're going to want.
Yeah. And then if it works, it works. And maybe that's the change required. Not that I support this or that, but, if people feel like that's the change that they need, then I guess soon we'll know in the midterm elections. Blake, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. If people wanted to find out more about your work and We Are the Mighty, I guess where can they do that? And what is the We Are the Mighty?
We Are the Mighty is a lifestyle site for the military veteran community. It is based in the U.S., but we support military personnel and their families from any country. We celebrate military service and the sacrifices that troops make to their country. We love great military stories. We talk a lot about military benefits and the kind of community that comes with service. So anything in the military world, not just U.S., interests you, come on, check us out. We have a lot of really great stuff on the website that I think a lot of enthusiasts will enjoy.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Blake.
Yeah, thank you. It was great.